and violence against women. I really can't say enough how I believe it's the mother issue. You know, if we realize that mothers, women, girls are the pulsing life force on this planet, not only does life come from us, but we are the, if you look at the front line of every environmental movement, racial justice movement, economic movement, LGBT movement, it's always women. Yeah. Women are driving those movements. Women are in positions, whether it's lawyers or teachers or doctors, women are, if we are muting, killing, raping, burning, cutting, destroying, incesting women, we are destroying the future. And what we do to women, we end up doing to the earth. It's the same story.
Eve, this is such a treat for me. We're so excited to have you in our community right here in the Upper Cumberland. Are you having a great time so far?
Oh, well, I just had an amazing time with the women and men who have been making V-Day and the Vagina Monologues happen here, and just was so moved by who they were, what they're doing, the incredible work, incredible spirits. So yes, I'm having a wonderful time.
You're an award-winning playwright. You are a mom, a grandmom. You're just an activist. You've done so much for women and bringing the cause of women straight forward. And the Vagina Monologues has been just a huge hit for over 15 years now. And I am proud that our community has been very active. The Tennessee Tech Backdoor Playhouse, under the direction of Mark Creeder, has been very active with this. How are you finding that in rural, small communities, not just in the South, but all over?
Well, I think what's most moving to me is to see the kind of progression of the Vagina Monologues out of the cities into the more rural and into communities that are off the grid. And I think that was my dream, that when I first started doing the play and it started to go out there, I knew it would take a while before it moved out of the big metropolis areas, you know, and out of the, and to me it's most exciting to see it in the rural areas where, you know, a lot of the culture doesn't get there necessarily, or where people really need support to come into their bodies, address violence, break the silence, and they don't get the support they need. Right. So I'm thrilled to see the play, having been done here, you know, for 8 years and 8 times, and to see the kind of impact it's having on changing consciousness.
Right. You said something in this presentation you just did with students about having this big table, this sort of inclusive, and sometimes people have to come to the table at their own time. Is that what you're seeing in rural communities, or even just with other folks?
Well, I always say the first year the vagina arrives in any town, people freak out and they don't want it. But I always laugh, you can put Scud missile or plutonium or acid rain on the front pages of any paper, but if you say vagina, people go crazy. And I always think, like, what is that telling us about the culture and the society, that we're most afraid of women's natural, beautiful parts from which we all have come, or most of us have come, unless you've had a cesarean birth, you know. What is it about the vagina that's so terrifying? So I think the first year there's always that fear and resistance and horror, and then next year it begins to change. And I love the journey of people who may have resisted the play initially, hearing about it and going, well, maybe I'll try it the second year, and then maybe I'll come the third year. And I think it's a journey. It's a journey. It doesn't happen overnight. But one of the things I heard once that I thought was very profound, it's often at the end of the shows we would ask women to stand up who had been violated or who had been raped. And one woman told me this great story, that the first year she was in the back on stage and she was by herself and she couldn't stand up. She couldn't even stand up, and she had been raped. And she said it took her 3 years, but the third year they did the show, she stood up in public and she got free. And it taught me something just about how long it takes us to break through the old paradigms, the old structures, the old ideology, what we've been taught. And we have to keep loving people through that journey and trusting that they will come if we keep inviting them back and not judging them.
And you talk a lot about respect. Just respecting people. Just
respecting. And how do we have differences and respect people? And, you know, I feel like so much of the world gets set up in these binaries. You know, we're for or against, right and left, yes and no, as opposed to, no, we're all in a human story. And how do we open our hearts and our wounds? I mean, one of the beautiful things about 1 Billion Rising this year is that we're looking at the intersection. You know, there is violence against women, and that's one story. But there are all these intersecting violences: racial violence, environmental violence, economic violence, gender violence, you know, that impacts violence against women. And part of this year has been the journey to open up your own sense of injustice, to take in the people around you's sense of injustice. Because everybody's struggling in their own way for the oppressions that have been put on them. And I think it's really teaching me about just being more open and constantly opening further and further to say, well, okay, I'm fighting here because I was raped. You know, I'm a white middle-class woman who was raped, but there are women of color who have had much less than me, who are fighting racial oppression and poverty and violence against women. So how do I open to their struggle and make that my struggle? And make us joined in our struggle.
Right. We did 1 Billion Rising here. I got to participate in that. How did you decide to do that? Explain that movement.
Well, you know, we reached 15 years of V-Day, and our mission was to go out of business. Our mission was to end violence against women and girls, and we were still here. And we'd had huge victories. Obviously, we've been doing the show for 15 years. Thousands of groups have benefited. Through that work of activists on the ground, we've raised $100 million that's been given away to grassroots groups. We've changed laws. We've created new legislation. You know, but we haven't ended violence. I mean, the truth of the matter is there's still enormous violence towards women and girls. So I had just recovered from stage 3/4 uterine cancer, and I went back to the Congo where, with the women of Congo who were directing the City of Joy and owning the City of Joy and building the City of Joy, we opened this amazing place, which was a revolutionary center for women to reclaim and heal their bodies and minds and become leaders of the Democratic Republic of Congo. And when I went back, I was 30 pounds thinner and I had no hair. I looked like a scary person. And the women took one look at me and they were like, oh my God. And they started doing what they do better, just like they just started to dance because there was nothing to say. And we all started to dance. And as we were dancing this amazing kind of regenerative, transformational, joyful dance, I started to think about that statistic that 1 out of 3 women on the planet will be raped or beaten in her lifetime. That's a UN World Health Organization statistic, and that's over 1 billion women. And I thought to myself, oh my God, what if 1 billion women and all the men who love them rose up on the same day and danced like this in every place on the planet? And what energy it would create, what coalition building. We'd get above the binaries. Right? We get into the dance space, which is beyond your ego, which is in your body, which is celebratory, it's dangerous, you can't control it, corporations can't buy it, it's free. And we put out this invitation, and I will tell you, it was wildfire. I mean, within weeks, the world was signing up. And last year, on February 14th, 207 countries, we think close to 1 billion people in the biggest mass action really in the history of the world. So we know there is an urgency in women across this planet. You know, violence is the methodology which sustains patriarchy. Without it, we would not have this oppressive system which denies women, eradicates women, oppresses women, undermines women, and eviscerates women's bodies. And when we saw this outpouring, it was, wow, we have a world movement that functions locally, that is self-directed, independently, autonomously driven. The grassroots activists own this movement. You know, I arrive in this town and I look at the amazing posters and the amazing ideas, but it's all been determined by the people here in Cookeville. I haven't done anything. The women and men in this town have made that happen, and that's true in hundreds and thousands of places all over the world. So we have this beautiful structure that is, you know, independently driven, made by activists with an agreement to end violence against women and girls and on certain basic principles and logos that we all share. But after that, and I think this year, we're now going further to rise for justice and dance for justice.
And everybody will do it in their own way at the same time,
and
globally,
at the
right?
sites of justice. You know, everybody has chosen the places where they most want justice in their community. Some people are rising at courthouses, some people are rising at churches, some people are rising at mining sites, some people are rising at pailletas in the slums, some people are rising on military bases. You know, everyone's rising where they believe they need the justice, and sometimes the economic and racial injustice is impacting them together. Sure. Sometimes, you know, environmental justice has created economic injustice. So those things are together. And it's so moving to see the sites and the places where people are rising. Already I think we're up to 190 countries, and I think we'll have as many as last year.
Wow. When did you know you were an activist?
When I was born.
Really? Just that spark, you know it was there?
Well, you know, I grew up in a very violent family. Violence was, from the time I was 5 until I left, I was a consequence of violence. And I saw the way other members of my family responded to living with the tyrannical, abusive, dominating father. And some people got quiet in my family, some people withdrew, some people, I, for whatever reason, was just not going to have it. So I was always in resistance. You know, I was always like, you're not going to determine my reality. And I think that really was the training ground of being an activist, of saying, no, you're not going to diminish me and destroy me and wipe me out and wipe my voice out and make me feel like, even though he did success for many years, I certainly took that in. But on the outside, I was always a fighter, you know. Now I feel like I've put down my sword and we're moving into another phase, which is not that I'm not resisting, but it feels like it's coming more from love than it is from the sword.
And when you wrote Vagina Monologues, did you intend to write this play? Did you sit down and say, oh, I have all...
No, it was really, it grew out of a conversation. A woman said really bizarre things about her vagina. I was surprised. I started taking notes for myself. And I had no intention of writing a play. And then I met a woman who was in her 60s, who had had a very humiliating experience when she was a child, and she had never had sex again. And I thought to myself, I just think sex is, you know, there are reasons to live, and sex is one of them. And without sex, I can't imagine what this world or life would be. And the idea that a woman had never had it was just crushing to me. So then I started to take it seriously, and I began to treat it as something that might be a play. And one thing led to another.
And it's gone on, and you think at some point it'll stop, but people won't let you stop, right?
Well, you know, the play has a life of its own now, and, you know, every year I say to my very small team in V-Day, well, this will probably be the last year, and they're like, no, it won't be. And I think it's thrilling to me that the play has been performed for 20 years and has been able to raise money and break taboos. But what's really moving to me is all the activists who bring it to their community, who fight through resistance, whether it's here in Tennessee or in Indiana or in Islamabad. I mean, it's, you know, there's always resistance to people talking about sex, addressing sex. And I just want to say, I don't think there's anything more important than having open, loving, healthy discussions about sex and sexuality. If we pretend it's not happening, it will not help our children. They will not be protected by the lack of discussion. The opposite is true. They will get pregnant, they will get diseases, they will be raped, they will be attacked, they will become boys who don't know how to treat women with consent. They will not learn what love is or tenderness is. So the lack of discourse is not actually going to move us forward. It's the discourse that moves us forward. It's the openness and telling the truth that moves us forward. And I think sometimes there's been a shaming around sex, and blaming, shaming and blaming, and making people feel bad about sexuality, which is really your life force expressing itself. And I think we need to break through that, and we need to, like, rejoice in our sexuality, and we need to have safe, beautiful, healthy, pleasurable sexuality that works for everybody.
When you were talking about the importance of conversations, and you gave a statistic in this meeting earlier about 70% of boys are learning what sexuality is from porn.
That's right.
I mean, that's alarming.
It's alarming. And you look at the kind of abuse that's going on now in high schools. You look at Steubenville, for example. You look at the rate, I think it's 300,000 girls are assaulted on college campuses a year. 300 in America, we're talking about. Where is all this abuse coming from? It's this objectified, distorted understanding of what sexuality is, and that it's actually reciprocal, that actually men and women participate in it together, that it goes back and forth, that it's about consents, that it's, you know, or men and men, or women and women. But, you know, it's like, how do we all, whether we're straight or gay or transgendered, learn about beautiful sexuality that moves in two directions and moves back and forth? And I think there's a fallacy that we have that, you know, you look at the church, for example, the Catholic Church. I think the most amount of money spent right now is on legal fees fighting pedophilia cases, right? Because there's a denial of sex, there's a repression of sex, there's a holding down of sex, and what that does is it turns into distortion. When we talk about sex and we're open with it, we actually create healthy sex. And I think it's one of the most important things we can do to end violence, because I think so many boys are terrified about performance and how they're doing and what it looks like, and so they jump on girls and they think that's sex, and they force themselves, or and it's really lack of education. No one's ever said to them that actually doesn't work. That isn't pleasurable. That's not what girls want. They want to actually be involved in the process, you know?
Right. You're a mom. You have a son, Dylan McDermott, who's a fabulous actor, and you have granddaughters, right? What did you learn from them? What did you learn from Dylan?
Oh, I learned a lot from Dylan. I mean, he's an amazing human being, and you know, he's a boy and he's a man, and you know, I think loving him and learning how to communicate with him taught me a lot about boys and how sensitive boys are, and how we don't allow them to be sensitive, how easily hurt they get, how our boys are really fragile inside, and yet they're forced to put up a veneer as if they aren't fragile, and as if they're tough and strong, but inside all kinds of other things are going on. And you know, I was fortunate to adopt Dylan when he was around 15, but he had come from a very difficult story himself, and a lot of our relationship has been about repair and healing. And so I've watched what violence did to him, and I've watched what the suppression of his emotional self has done to him, and how many years it's taken him to recover from that. And I think we all need to be aware that boys are human beings. You know, they're feeling beings. When we tell them not to cry, we're not helping them. We're actually shutting down their capacity for compassion and empathy and connection. And so then years later, when they're raping a girl who's screaming, "Stop, stop," and we say, how could a boy do that? Well, I'll tell you how they did that. They were taught when they were 5 years old not to feel anything for somebody, and to shut off those feelings. And when they get to that point where they're violent, well, of course they're violent. What are bullets but hardened tears? You know, that we've actually frozen inside boys. So I think our journey together has been a powerful journey in teaching me, you know, who boys really are.
Right. You've done a lot of work with PBS, actually. You had a POV documentary, a point of view documentary called What I Want My Words to Do to You, and you worked with a correctional facility. You did that by sharing a workshop with women. How important is it for you to write down your thoughts? These women wrote down their feelings.
Well, I think working at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility with incarcerated women was one of the most powerful experiences in my life. And I think this country, our prison system is abominable. I mean, we have, what, 2 or 3 million people in prisons, mainly black and brown poor people. And as my friend Sister Elaine says, it's basically permanent housing for the poor. You know, we have a system that is basically systemic, where we are people who do not have economic rights, people who are treated poorly from the time they're born by systems that are oppressing people in various forms, end up in prisons because that is where, that is the outcome of those original systems. And then when they get to prison, there are no programs for transformation. There is nothing there that would ever address those original systems that have brought them to prison, or their personal impact. You know, what is it, 60% of all women in prison have had major violence to them. So that has led them to prison, you know, and that's just one form of violence. We're not talking about racial injustice or economic injustice that has brought them there. So for me, that experience in Bedford Hills was, you know, I was there for 6 or 7 years running this group with violent offenders, people who had long-term sentences, and it was profound to see the longing of women in prison to address what had happened to them, what brought them there, how they would make recompense with it, how to really rid themselves and to take responsibility for their deeds. And there's no structures inside prison for anybody to do that. So writing and telling their stories and writing it down became a crucial process. And I'm happy to say that many women in that group are now out doing unbelievable work for other women, which they would be doing, of course. I think after you're in prison for 10 years, it's kind of done the trick. Why we're keeping people in prison 25, 29, and to life, for most cases, and so many people were there for these ridiculous drug laws that are keeping people in prison endlessly when they could be valuable citizens and people in the world serving in a much more profound way.
Yeah. You know, I think you're absolutely right, and what I think about is how important is it for other people to write down their feelings?
Well, I think one of the biggest problems we have in violence against women is most women haven't even told their stories. Most women don't even say, I have a right to tell my story, or believe even that the violence done to them is really violence because it's been so normalized, right? So I think when you start to write your story and you read your story and you share your story, you begin to actualize yourself. You get feedback where someone goes, that happened to you? That's horrible. And you go, it is? You know? I remember when I told someone one of the first times, my father was once beating my head against a wall and he screamed to my mother to get a kitchen knife, and I was laughing about it. And somebody said, that is horrible. And I was like, it is? Like I didn't have any context for it because that was going on every day in my family. And I suddenly was like, whoa, maybe that wasn't a good thing. So I think when we share our stories, we begin to get a context.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
You know.
I know you're a very spiritual person. I know you've written a new book about your journey through cancer and through other, I guess, finding peace. What can you share with us about that? The name of the book is In the Body of the World, right? And I can't wait to read it. I think many of us go through journeys that it will be very beneficial. What can you share with us about that?
Well, cancer was a rude awakening. It was a shock. You know, I was going to Haiti in a couple days to support our sisters that we work with there, and I went to the doctor because I had been ignoring something that was going on in my body, and they discovered a tumor the size of a mango, and literally within 4 days I was in 9-hour surgery, and it was just like, whoa, you know. And when I woke up, I was missing 7 organs and 70 nodes, and things had been rearranged, and it was radical. It was radical. But really, that whole journey, because that was the beginning of the journey, the operation, then there were months of infection, then there were months of chemo, and it was really an amazing experience because it landed me fully and truly. I was body. I came out of that operation and I had catheters and tubes and everything coming out of me, but I was body, and I was home. And it really began this journey of reconnection to nature, reconnection to my sister, who we had been estranged because of the divisions and tactics of my father. It began a journey of understanding love in a whole new way, but really it became me being in my body and not having to prove anything anymore, not treating this body like a machine that's going to get me to the next place because I'm striving and trying to prove that I'm enough, I'm enough, I'm enough. I think the majority of people in this world feel like they are not enough, and their whole life is about showing up and proving to somebody that they are somebody, as opposed to understanding that we are enough just because we're here, because we're human, because we love, because we breathe, because we eat, because we see flowers and trees and walk the streets. And my life has changed very radically since then. The engine that was kind of driving my life, it's not that engine anymore, you know, and it feels good in here. I like this body. It's been a very kind body. I'm functioning perfectly, and I'm missing 7 organs and 70 nodes, and I'm 4 years cancer-free, and it feels like crazy ridiculous that I'm alive, you know. So I get up every day and I go, okay. I run my hand over my scar, and I'm like, okay, it's good news. I'm breathing and I'm here.
Well, you look great.
Thank you. I feel great.
That's awesome to have that kind of energy. It's got to feel like you're in a good place.
No, it's second wind energy. It's
yeah,
like, okay,
that's right.
I died, done. Now we're dead.
Now I'm back.
And now we're living like
That's
full-time, you know, post-death.
It's so great. You and I share the same birthday. We're both,
Yes,
we
Geminis.
have May 12th, that's right, we're both Geminis. And in the few minutes we have left, I saw your piece on the PBS series Makers. I'm so appreciative of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting doing a Women and Girls Lead initiative and funding documentaries. And what is the most important thing we can do right now?
As women?
As women, as a society, to really individually make a difference right now.
And violence against women. I really can't say enough how I believe it's the mother issue. You know, if we realize that mothers, women, girls are the pulsing life force on this planet. Not only does life come from us, but we are the, if you look at the front line of every environmental movement, racial justice movement, economic movement, LGBT movement, it's always women. Yeah. Women are driving those movements. Women are in positions, whether it's lawyers or teachers or doctors, women are, if we are muting, killing, raping, burning, cutting, destroying, incesting women, we are destroying the future. And what we do to women, we end up doing to the earth. It's the same story. You know, we destroy women's bodies, we destroy the body of the earth. So if we direct our energies to cherishing women and respecting women and devoting ourselves to women, we are actually doing the same to life itself.
Thank you. Thank you for everything you've done. Thank you so much for being here in Tennessee. We're so thrilled to have you.